Indian Metaphysics. K. Kadoga. 1. History of philosophical debates after the epistemological turn. Currents in Indian philosophy. After the Vedic period, ca. 1500 to 500 BC, various philosophical systems emerged in the Indian subcontinent, particularly from the 5th century BC when Buddhism arose. Philosophy developed along the axis of contrast between Brahmins and Ramas, wandering ascetics. Questions about primordial principles and existence culminated in Skaya dualism and the detailed ontology of Abhidharma around the beginning of the Common Era. Speculation rooted in grammar then progressed toward establishing means of knowledge, prama, including valid logical reasoning and scriptural authority. The question of means of knowledge strongly characterized philosophical debates from the 5th century CE onward. In Indian theories of perception, we can easily find problem sets analogous to Western modern epistemology. Meanwhile, the Indian tradition of debate offered an alternative empirical perspective on inference. The handling of language and scripture shows distinctively Indian speculation. Behind the dogmatic debates about scripture and deity was a strict epistemology concerning perception, inference, and language. After the 5th century CE, Indian philosophy developed a sophisticated epistemology that makes it difficult for non-specialists to approach. This explains why ancient Upanishadic philosophy and related theologies, which can be understood without detailed epistemology, have often been taken as representative of Indian philosophy. This article examines Indian philosophy from the 5th to 12th century CE, focusing on the debates between Buddhism and Brahmanical schools. The impact of Dinaga on epistemology. Vasubandhu, 350 to 430 CE, of the Yogacara school advocated for a mind-only Vijnaptimatra view that denied external reality. The Buddhist logician Dinaga, 470 to 530 CE, following in this tradition, established his own theories in his masterpiece Compendium of Valid Means of Knowledge, Pramasamkhya. While critically incorporating Vasubandhu's theories, he also criticized other schools, including Nyaya logic, Vaika naturalism, Skaya dualism, and Mimamsa scriptural hermeneutics. In response to Dinaga's criticisms, the Mimamsa scholar Kumarila, 600 to 650 CE, established a philosophical system defending Vedic scripture against Buddhism in his verse commentary Slokavartika. He addresses various topics including the truth of cognition and language, omniscience, violence, 6 means of knowledge, cognition without corresponding external objects, mental images, rituals for worldly benefit, phonemes, words, sentences, the Veda, word meaning, universals, exclusion of others, the relation between word and meaning, God, and individual self. Responding to Kumarila's criticisms, the Buddhist logician Dharmakiri, 600 to 660 CE, established a comprehensive system of Buddhist logic and epistemology in his commentary on Valid Means of Knowledge, Brahmavartika, and subsequent works. He revised Dinaga's theories, creating a philosophical system that would guide Buddhist logic and epistemology thereafter, eventually extending to Tibetan Buddhism. Meanwhile, Dinaga's logic prior to Dharmakirti's revisions spread to East Asia through Xuanzang's Chinese translations. Philosophical topics in 8th century compendiums. Drakita, 725 to 788 CE, an abbot of Nalanda Monastery who brought full ordination to Tibet, critically surveyed Indian thought in his philosophical Compendium of Principles, Tattvasagraha. He discusses various fundamental principles. The primordial material cause of Skaya, the creator god of Nyayavayika, both of these in theistic Skaya, causelessness, the word Brahman of the grammarian Bhartari, and the pure consciousness of Skaya dualism. He then critiques theories of the eternal individual self, Atman, from various schools, Nyayavayika, Mimamsa, Skaya, Jainism, Vedanta theology, and the Vatsaputriya Buddhist sect. After confirming basic Buddhist concepts like momentariness and the relation between action and its result, he systematically criticizes the Vaika categories, substance, quality, motion, universal, particular, and inherence. In his theory of word meaning, he criticizes Brahmanical views that take universals or individuals as word meanings, establishing instead the uniquely Buddhist semantic theory of exclusion of others anipoa, aligned with his representationalist epistemology. He then discusses the 2 Buddhist means of knowledge, perception and inference, while rejecting other means of knowledge accepted by other schools. After critiquing Jaina relativism, theories of 3 times, past, present, future, materialism, and theories that accept external reality, he concludes that all this is merely cognition, Vijnaptimatra. In his appendix, Drakita devotes many verses to criticizing Kumarila on 3 topics, whether words, including Vedic scripture, are natural or conventional, the truth of cognition and language, and the Buddha's omniscience. These were hot topics concerning religious authority that Kumarila had extensively developed. Opposition between Buddhism and Brahmanical religion. The perspective of viewing Indian thought through the lens of Kumarila and Dharmakirti can also be found in the masterpiece, Bouquet of Logic, Nyamanjari, by the Nyaya logician Janta, 840 to 900 CE. Janta fully adopts Dharmakirti's theory of the totality of causal factors in his causal theory and introduces theories of sentence meaning, one of the most important discussions for scriptural hermeneutics, into the Nyaya tradition. Regarding God, Isvara, who controls creation, maintenance, and dissolution, he argues for the existence of God from the Nyaya perspective against the exceptional allied front of Kumarila, who denies God because Mimamsa considers the Veda non-created and eternal, and the atheist Dharmakirti. Janta also classifies various sciences and religions, positioning Nyaya alongside Mimamsa within Brahmanical sciences centered on Vedic scripture, securing an independent status for Nyaya as logic, including debate, that actively defends scripture against Buddhist critique. He places Saiva and Vaishnava religions as non-Vedic, Buddhism, Jainism, and Skaya, including yoga, as anti-Vedic, and materialistic views and cults at the bottom as unworthy of being called independent doctrines. Ultimately, he proposes a kind of religious pluralism stating that all scriptures, agama, are correct. He also defends Nyaya debate methodology against Dharmakirti's sharp criticism in Method of Debate, Vadanyaya. Jananasri, ca. 1000 CE, one of the 6 gates of wisdom at Vikramasila Monastery, criticizes the Nyaya scholar Basarvajna, the Mimamsa commentator Sukarita, early 10th century, and Bakaspati, who wrote commentaries on various Brahmanical systems. He also mentions Nyaya scholars whose works are now lost, Akarasman, Vyoka, Trilokana. He discusses momentariness of existence, pervasion relation and inference, concept theory, exclusion of others, and God. He also engages in debate with Ratnakarasanti, the chief of 4 gatekeepers at Vikramasila, on whether images in cognition are real or false. The disagreement about whether images appearing in perception, like blue, exist truly as identical with cognition or are merely fabricated and false was also seen between the earlier Prajnakaragupta, 775 to 840 CE, and Dharmadhara, 740 to 800 CE. This debate goes back to the opposition between Dharmapala, 530 to 561 CE, and Tharamati, 480 to 555 CE. Kumarila's successor in scriptural hermeneutics, Mana, 660 to 720 CE, organizes both theories as manifestation of cognition itself and manifestation of non-being, from the perspective of error theory. Mana's influence is evident in Prajnakaragupta, who uses terms from error theory introduced by Mana and discusses Mimamsa sentence theory in detail at the beginning of his ornament to commentary on valid means of knowledge. Udayana, 1050 to 1100 CE, who wrote a super commentary following Bakaspati's sub-commentary on Adyotakara's commentary on Vatsyayana's commentary on the Nyaya Sutra, compiled theistic and self-affirmative arguments in independent works, refuting Buddhist criticisms and establishing God and self in Brahmanical religion. The lineage of Mana, who attempted to interpret the ritual and knowledge portions of Vedic scripture coherently, the versatile Bakaspati, who commented on Mana's works, and the logically sharp Udayana is particularly important considering their influence on New Nyaya, Navya Nyaya, beginning with Gajya, late 12th century. Salakanatha, late 9th century, a major figure in the Mimamsa Prabhakra school whom Gajya regarded as a main opponent and whom New Nyaya always presented as an opponent after Buddhism declined, was a scriptural hermeneutician versed in Vaika ontology. He discusses various philosophical topics, including the theory of objectless cognition, error theory, universals, means of knowledge, perception, inference, scripture, analogy, hypothetical reasoning, absence of means of knowledge, relation of word meaning, individual self, permanence of phonemes, momentariness, and sentence meaning. This article traces the development of Indian epistemology, ontology, semantics, and logic from the 5th to 12th centuries as Indian metaphysics, focusing on Buddhist scholars whose dates are relatively easily established through connections with China and Tibet. The dates of the scholars in parentheses are provisional and provided for convenience to show relative chronology. 2. Questions about reality. 2 currents in ontology. In Indian philosophical ontology, there are 2 main systems. 1. A horizontal classification of elements like the 18 datas of Abhidharma, corresponding to sense organs, color/form, sound, smell, taste, touch, mental objects, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, visual cognition, auditory cognition, olfactory cognition, gustatory cognition, tactile cognition, mental cognition, or the 6 categories of Vaika, substance, quality, motion, universal, particular, inherence, and 2, skaya, dualism, which contrasts pure consciousness with primordial matter and includes hierarchical development from subtle to gross, recognizing 25 principles: pure consciousness, primordial matter, intellect, I consciousness, mind. 5 sense organs: ear, body, eye, tongue, nose. 5 action organs: mouth, hands, feet, anus, genitals. 5 subtle elements: sound, touch, color, taste, smell, and 5 gross elements: ether, air, fire, water, earth. The sky view is more compatible with theological systems that place a creator god at the top. For example, Saiva theology typically extends Sky's 25 principles to 36. Ontology, at least at the conventional level, is historically one of the less changing areas of Indian philosophy. Later debates merely concern whether to add certain substances like darkness or capacity. At the theological level, however, opinions differ on what ultimate reality everything reduces to. For example, Janta describes monistic theories including Brahman non-dualism, word Brahman non-dualism, and cognition non-dualism, Vijnanavada. That Dinaga, in his examination of the 3 times, copies Barthari's description, but replaces word Brahman with cognition, beautifully demonstrates that word Brahman and cognition can occupy the same position as the ultimate one. The flow of various Yogacara theories, such as self-luminosity of cognition, into Vedanta theology and Saiva theology also indicates their original compatibility. Atomism and part-whole relations. Just as atomism was incorporated into Abhidharma, atoms, paramu, as imperceptible minimal units are generally accepted as a common premise in debates between Brahmanical religions based on Vaika ontology and Buddhism based on Abhidharma ontology. In Vaika, atoms are recognized in 4 of the 9 substances: earth, water, fire, air. The remaining substances, ether, time, direction, individual self, Atman, are maximally large and all-pervading. The individual self, while all-pervading, is limited to a specific body, making its function localized. Meanwhile, the mind, manas, belonging to an individual is minimal, atom-sized. The mind, called the internal organ in contrast to the external organs of the 5 senses, functions as a switch connecting the 5 senses and the self to produce cognition in Vaika and Nyaya, explaining concentration. However, it sometimes bears other roles as theoretical requirements dictate. In Buddhism too, the role of the mind is not uniform, becoming a complex concept bearing multiple roles as required by doctrinal systems. In Vaika ontology, whole and parts exist in an inherence relation where the whole inheres in its parts. For example, cloth and threads are related by cloth inhering in threads. Although they are inseparably related, they remain distinct existences. The whole is not completely reduced to its parts as in Buddhism, which denies the reality of wholes. Kumarila, seeing difficulties in the ontology that completely separates whole and parts in debates with Buddhism, adopts a view closer to Jainism's multiple perspectives, holding that things can be both different and non-different, ontologically identical while clearly distinguished in cognition. Meanwhile, the grammarian Barthari consistently takes the view that only wholes truly exist, denying the reality of parts. For Barthari, only sentences are truly existing and actually used, language, while words and phonemes are merely conceptual constructs extracted afterward by scholars. Ultimately, only the word Brahman truly exists. The phenomenal world of various word meanings exists, only metaphorically. Universal debate and apoha theory. The Vaika classification of existence based on substance, quality, and motion has its roots in the tripartite classification of nouns, adjectives, and verbs. It's worth noting that as a general tendency in Indian philosophy, grammar as the science of language serves as a source of ideas for various philosophies. This explains the importance of Patanjali's, ca. 150 BC, great commentary, and Barthari's works in the lineage of Penius, ca. 380 BC, grammar. Their wide-ranging influence is easily confirmed even at the level of style and terminology. Meanwhile, fierce debate continues between Brahmanical schools that accept the reality of universals, jati, common to all individuals, and Buddhism, which advocates impermanence and denies permanent realities. Dinaga establishes the difference or exclusion of non-cows as the meaning of the word cow instead of cowness as a universal. That is, instead of recognizing a real common property like universals, he posits exclusion of others anipoa as the meaning of the word cow. For Dinaga, what the word cow designates is what is not non-cow. This view of meaning as difference, distinction from others, is already recognized in grammatical theories of sentence meaning, e.g., discussion of the meaning of compounds like black sesame. Dinaga incorporates this, sublimating it into his distinctive theory of word meaning. He further extends this to concept theory in general, making exclusion of others the object of all conceptual cognition, Savikalpajnana, that includes linguistic conceptualization. Apoha theory as a theory of word meaning and concepts remains a point of contention with Brahmanical religions after Dinaga and undergoes theoretical deepening and development. Even within Buddhism, there is no monolithic view. Responding to Kumarila's criticism of Dinaga, Dharmakirti attempts to ground Apoha theory not only semantically, but also ontologically and in terms of action theory. Consequently, Dharmakirti and his direct successors' Apoha theory, which clearly trends towards seeing mental images as real, receives modification and criticism from Dharmadhara, who considers mental images false. Janta records both Buddhist theories. The opposition between imageless and image-bearing theories continues until the final period of Indian Buddhism with Ratnakara Santi and Jananasri. 3. Epistemology. The Prama, means of knowledge, turn. The chapter structure of Dinaga's Compendium of Valid Means of Knowledge 1. Perception 2. Inference for oneself 3. Inference for others 4. Examples 5. Exclusion of others 6. Sophistical rejoinders in debate has a great influence on later epistemology through Dharmakirti. It also symbolizes how the long Indian tradition of proof and debate before Dinaga was incorporated under the framework of means of knowledge, prama. Dinaga views the mental process of inferring fire from smoke and the verbal proof in debate, sound is impermanent, because it is produced, like a pot, as isomorphic cognitive processes, calling the former inference for oneself and the latter inference for others. He also posits exclusion of others, non-cow exclusion, instead of universals, cowness, as the meaning of words like cow. According to him, language, like inference for others, is nothing but a process that highlights the common characteristic, impermanence, cow in general, through exclusion of others, exclusion of permanent things, exclusion of non-cows, from reason. Being produced, the word cow. Dinaga also incorporates sophistical techniques in debate into the discussion of inference by treating them as pseudo-proofs and pseudo-refutations. Pervasion relation as premise of inference. In inference, well-known examples like a kitchen or a pot have traditionally been considered necessary. There is fire on that mountain, because there is smoke, like in a kitchen, or sound is impermanent, because it is produced, like a pot. One infers mountain fire by analogy with a kitchen. Vajabandhu, moving beyond mere analogy, explicitly states that the logical reason must have the relation where there is no probandum. There is never reason, such as where there is no fire. There is never smoke. Further refining the three conditions of a logical reason, Trirupa Hichu, established before Dinaga. Dinaga sets three conditions. 1. Smoke is a property of the mountain. 2. Smoke exists only where fire exists. And 3. Smoke never exists where there is no fire. He expresses the fire-smoke relation in spatial terms of broader and narrower domains, using the term pervasion vyapti to mean that smoke is pervaded by fire. Thereafter, Dinaga's term pervasion becomes generally used in Indian philosophy to indicate necessary relations or general laws. The expression limitation is also seen. The source of Dinaga's conception of pervasion is the usage of the limiting qualifier only. For Kumarila, who accepts universal realism, explaining pervasion relations is easy. He expresses the learning method of general laws as seen many times. Through repeated experience, one understands the general relation between smokeness and fireness as universals. Meanwhile, for Dinaga, who denies universals, explaining the learning of pervasion relations is not easy. He abandons positive learning methods and appeals to negative ones. The device that appears here is the concept of non-perception adarsana/anupalabdhi/agraha, meaning has never been seen. However, inference based on inexperience, like because it has never been seen before, is like inference based on experience, because it has been seen many times before. Ultimately empirical and cannot guarantee the correctness of inference with 100% certainty, since it cannot cover all individuals across future, present, and past. Katsura Shoryu assesses Dinaga's pervasion relation as a kind of hypothesis that remains valid as long as counterexamples are not found in the dissimilar class or group. Katsura Shoryu, Indian Logic. Dharmakirti sharply points out the limitations of empiricism common to both Kumarila's past experience and Dinaga's inexperience. Dharmakirti argues that the objective causal relation between fire and smoke is the foundation of inference. In the case of sound's impermanence and being produced, he explains that the objective foundation is that the logical reason, being produced, has impermanence as its essence. Being produced cannot exist without impermanence. Among the two characteristics sharing sound as their existential basis, he calls these two foundations nature being bound, and declares that this is the principle behind the second and third conditions that a logical reason must have. As a result, Dharmakirti's logic is essentially liberated from the spell of examples. Inference not requiring examples is fully advocated in Ratnakara Santi's treatise on internal pervasion. Meanwhile, the preceding Dinaga considered it essential to state examples consisting of similar cases, a kitchen known to have fire, and dissimilar cases, a lake known to have no fire, to exemplify the pervasion relation that the logical reason, e.g., smoke, must satisfy. He also noticed the logical redundancy, contraposition of the second and third conditions of the logical reason. However, unable to completely abandon traditional theory, he provides a compromising explanation. Dharmakirti, too, while not explicitly criticizing his predecessor Dinaga, criticizes the interpretation of Isvarsena who followed Dinaga, explaining Dinaga's true intention while maintaining tradition on the surface. The skill of extracting one's own theory and criticizing others while seemingly preserving tradition is the specialty of first-class philosophers who are commentators. The same applies to the sub-commentator Prajnakaragupta, who extracts unique theories. In Buddhist logic and epistemology, it's important to note that they stand on the position of Sautrantika, which accepts the reality of external objects conventionally, but conveniently, stands on the position of Yogacara, which denies the reality of external objects ultimately. Kumarila criticizes this convenient stance. The honest position of Buddhist logicians is that inference is consistent within the conventional world without discrepancy. For them, conceptual knowledge like inference is not truly correct. Inferential knowledge is not as the object is and is essentially erroneous. It is recognized as a valid means of cognition only because it functions well in the world and is practically useful. Dinaga is conscious of this limitation and declares that he does not pursue whether the usage of words is correct, but merely follows worldly convention. While Dinaga and Dharmakirti basically build their epistemology based on Sautrantika while being careful about consistency with Yogacara, Prajnakaragupta re-explains epistemology with more emphasis on the Yogacara position. In Yogacaра's cognition monism, even the causal relation between fire and smoke established in the external world ultimately does not hold. There is only cognition that arises and perishes moment by moment, shining forth by itself. Truth theory and falsifiability. Dinaga's method of establishing pervasion relations was essentially based on non-perception or inexperience, not having been seen before. The simplistic attitude that, if not seen, it does not exist, or if an object is not experienced by any means of knowledge, such an object does not exist, is generally seen in Indian philosophy before Dharmakirti, who thoroughly criticizes the attitude one cannot say it does not exist just because it is not seen. Kumarila lists absence of the other 5 positive means of knowledge as the 6th means of knowledge, stating that the absence of an object, e.g., a pot supposed to be on the ground, is recognized when there is no positive evidence by perception, inference, testimony, etc. He maintains a similar attitude regarding the truth of cognition. His basic position is that cognition is correct if there is no problem with it. For Kumarila, the Vedic scripture, which should be absolutely true, is eternal and non-created text without an author. Therefore, the positive proof method like that of Nyaya, Vedic scripture is correct because it was authored by a reliable person, God, is cut off from the beginning. So he begins by asking generally whether the truth, correctness, of words or cognition is based on something else or not. The self-sufficient truth in the ontological sense is that when visual cognition arises from visual causes, the character of truth is simultaneously incorporated, not requiring additional causes, e.g., excellent eyes for truth. Cognition is already given the basic character of truth when it arises. Such a basic character is exceptionally cancelled when there are problems with the eyes, like jaundice or cataracts. Even in the epistemological sense, truth is autonomous and independent of others. Kumarila points out that if the correctness of cognition must be verified by cognition, then the correctness of cognition would need to be verified by cognition, leading to infinite regress, pointing out the flaw that foundationalism falls into. Furthermore, if cognition is admitted to be autonomously correct, Kumarila asks why cognition is not recognized as correct by itself. Ultimately, even proponents of other dependent truth must admit some autonomously true cognition somewhere. Thus, Kumarila establishes the position that all cognition is autonomously correct, does not need to be verified by others, by pointing out the flaw of infinite verification regress that other dependent truth entails. However, this is only in cases where no problems are found with cognition, discovery of problems in cognitive causes, or cancellation of prior cognition by subsequent cognition. His claim is that cognition is correct by itself, in principle, as long as 2 types of exceptional problems are not discovered. Kumarila warns against the anxiety of falsifiability from a practical standpoint. One who, due to ignorance, imagines a cognition that negates a prior cognition while it has not actually arisen, will become a massive doubt in all activities and fall into ruin. According to Kumarila, doubts about falsifiability should end after 3 stages at most, using the analogy of a trial that reaches a verdict in 3 stages. In contrast, Dharmakirti sharply points out that even if no counter-evidence has been seen in life so far, the doubt that it might exist does not disappear, indicating that doubts about falsifiability do not disappear. If one takes an empirical position like Kumarila, one cannot escape Dharmakirti's criticism. While the unrealistic imagination of refutation was a harmful worry for Kumarila, for Dharmakirti it is rather a mark of wisdom. The scope of error theory. Following the three-nature system of Yogacara, Dinaga assumes three levels of cognition. 1. Yogi's perception that intuits ultimate reality, e.g., seeing everything as impermanent, suffering, non-self. 2. Perception, non-conceptual cognition, that grasps causally real momentary particulars. And 3. Conceptual cognition, determinate cognition, of conventionally posited things which is essentially erroneous, not as the object is. The last cognition, which is erroneous by being conceptual, is further divided into 3a, inference, recollection, etc. based on past experience. 3b, conventional reality cognition that conceptually grasps general characteristics like pot or cow following perception. And 3c, erroneous cognition like illusion, seeing a rope as a snake or dreams. While Brahmanical schools recognize conceptual cognition following non-conceptual perception, 3b, as a type of perception, Buddhism does not. Note that this classification does not handle well illusions like floaters that don't involve conceptualization. This is why the commentator Dharmakirti adds the condition, not erroneous, to the condition of perception, free from conceptualization. Sky flowers and rabbit horns are classified as absolute non-existence, used as examples of things that do not actually produce any images in cognition. The subject of Buddhist epistemology, which limits means of knowledge to perception and inference, becomes 2 and 3a. However, looking at Dinaga's works, one can see that he takes up a wide range of subjects comprehensively. In the case of the illusion of mistaking a rope for a snake, the snake is at level 3c. What is conventionally said to exist is the rope at 3b. However, from the element reductionist view of Abhidharma, only the elements constituting the rope really exist as particulars too. But from the Yogacara viewpoint, only cognition, 1, exists. Yogacara theory uses erroneous cognition like dreams, 3c, to expose that all ordinary people's cognition, including perception, 2, 3a, 3b, is erroneous. Kumarila criticizes the Buddhist proof formula, all cognition lacks objects, is objectless, because it is cognition, like dreams. Kumarila also argues that it is external objects, not cognition, that have images. He criticizes both the Sautrantika theory that images similar to external objects are thrown into cognition, and the Yogacara theory that images are produced in cognition by latent impressions, memory, left by prior experience. Monistic theologies and Yogacara expose that ordinary people's cognition, including perception and inference generally considered correct in the world, is essentially erroneous, using dreams and illusions as examples. The scriptural hermeneutician Mana, in his discrimination of error, organizes various schools' theories on what appears in illusions, e.g., mistaking a shining mother of pearl for silver. The lineage of representationalist epistemology, true image theory, in Buddhism holds that cognition itself appears as silver. Cognition is erroneous in superimposing silverness on the image in cognition. Meanwhile, the lineage of non-representationalist epistemology, false image theory, holds that the silver appearing in cognition is mere fiction. They reject the structure of superimposition that places silverness on the cognitive image. Like objects appearing in dreams, silver appears without requiring any foundation, yet it is non-existent. As a result, they are questioned by other schools about the difference from absolute non-existence like rabbit horns. Meanwhile, Brahmanical schools, believing that cognition cannot be objectless and must always have a corresponding object, insist that even erroneous cognition has a corresponding reality. The Mimamsa Prabhakra school holds that perception of mother of pearl and recollection of silver are two distinct cognitions that are not distinguished, but mixed up. Meanwhile, Mimamsa Kumarila school and Nyaya hold that the form of silver once experienced appears on the mother of pearl through memory in a different way, with only the combination of place and time being wrong. Silver itself is not fabricated but something experienced somewhere before. Kumarila holds that even in cases like dreams, external objects are not denied, and some external object, in a different place and time, exists as the correspondence of cognition. Mana himself adopts the view that illusions cannot be determined as either existent or non-existent. This theory would profoundly influence later theology.